Hello, and welcome to Ask Me Anything, a series from Security Magazine where security leaders answer your questions about the industry, from best practices for risk management to the ins and outs of their position. I'm your host, Madeline Laver, editor-in-chief at Security Magazine. Today, I'm joined by Chris Singh, Senior Security Manager at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Chris has risen through the ranks over the last nearly 2 decades at the New York City Cultural Institution, from starting off in sales to working as a security officer and dispatcher before moving into security management. Chris also brings intelligence experience to the role, having served as an intel analyst at the Metropolitan Transit Authority's Counterterrorism Security Division. Welcome, Chris.
Hey Madeline, how's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, readers from across our social media platforms have submitted their questions for you today, so let's get started. The first question that we received is, what was your first security role and what sparked your interest in security?
So my first security role was here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was 2012, the recession had happened, and I needed a job that actually had benefits. I was in sales previously, and since I couldn't get any jobs in the field that I studied, forensic science, I decided I might as well just make the transition to security, get some health benefits. And I stuck with it. I just fell in love with working with people and kept it going.
That human aspect I find really interesting as well. I know you've risen through the ranks in the security field. What advice do you have for security professionals entering a managerial role for the first time?
I would say definitely work on your soft skills. I took it for granted. I was pretty much good on my hard skills with the technical aspects of checking video feeds and writing reports, but you have to know how to manage a team. You also have to know how to liaison with other stakeholders. So work on that aspect. Public speaking too. I'm still working on that, and presentations. One book that I started to really lean on was Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. So anybody who's going to the managerial level, dive into that, open up your mind and your tool belt, add some skills to it.
That's a really interesting resource as well. We had another reader question that asked, when it comes to protecting cultural properties, what are some of the main security threats to monitor for?
So with museums, you have so many different types of artwork. So environmental issues come up. It could be a leak, it could be pests, it could be lighting issues. So that's just one aspect. Vandalism is another one. That's a human element. You have people who don't know how to behave in a cultural institution and may not really think it's a problem to, write on something or touch something that they shouldn't. So vandalism, theft comes up. And these days, cybersecurity threats, because museums are all soft targets. So those are just a few.
That cybersecurity piece is really interesting. Could you go into that a little bit more, like what types of threats have been seen?
Well, I'm also part of the International Council of Museum Security, ICOM, the
Mm.
International Council of Museums. And what they've noticed in smaller institutions, here at the Met, we're very lucky. We have a dedicated technology team. But around the world, they don't have that infrastructure in place at much smaller institutions. So when you talk about cyber security threats, you're talking about the possibility of holding your data hostage, ransomware, waiting for you to pay a fee before they release it. Also taking um, identity theft information. So if you have visitors who are paying with credit cards in the POS system, like what happened in Target, I think a lot of people remember that incident. So those are still issues that we face here in this world of museum security.
That's really interesting. You covered a wide range of threats in that too, but that, as well as the environmental aspect, are things that affect people in many different sectors. I find that very interesting. Another reader question that we had was, what are the advantages or disadvantages of contract versus proprietary security guards at museums? I wondered if you could go into that a bit.
So, I mean, the advantages of having contract security is scalability. You have events that happen, you need to staff them appropriately to mitigate any potential risks. So being able to reach out to a contract security company and scale up your operations, that's a big benefit. You can shift risk as well. So if you're holding a program and that company, whoever they may be, they'd be responsible for managing all of that. You'd be there providing oversight, but at the end of the day, they'll help mitigate the threats on that end. Also, less overhead costs. So instead of having on-site security, you're talking about having lockers for them, uniforms for them, conducting payroll. So if another company took that on, you're lowering your cost. The disadvantage is quality control. You get what you pay for. So if if the person doing the job is not really on par with what your operations or the aesthetic of your establishment, it's going to look bad on you. Um, they don't have that institutional knowledge. They don't know the building. They don't know the guests that are coming in. So that's another disadvantage. And level of engagement. Some some contract security officers, they're doing long shifts, and when they come to your establishment, they may not be all there and not ready for the job. But with proprietary, you have more control. You have the ability to do training on the fly, institutional knowledge, that level of engagement. They're not just here doing security, but they're part of your organization. So they feel, a just like I did, just like I felt here at the museum, a strong passion for the actual museum and the artwork and the visitors. So they build those bonds through the years. It's not just another site that they're going to work at.
That guest services aspect of it is really interesting. Could you speak a bit from your experience on like building that relationship with the museum and how that can then benefit security as a security officer?
Definitely. In the world of security, it's not just enforcing the rules, it's that level of customer service, de-escalation, day in, day out. What are you really doing? You're people watching. You're watching how people move, how they interact with their environment, and you're part of that. You're part of that environment. So when you welcome a guest in, they may have come outside with one aspect. I'm here in New York City, so it can be kind of rough out there. And some people may say, it's tough in New York, but when you come into the museum, we welcome you with open arms, and we're very warm about that. So you can change somebody's viewpoint on not only the museum but the location. So you're representative on many fronts.
Thank you for going into that. Another reader question that we had was what role does threat monitoring and other technology play in cultural and arts institution protection?
So it plays a huge role these days. Um, Threats are popping up left and right. We're not operating in a world with just fixed walls and fences. So you need to have that open source intelligence going out, constantly monitoring. And it's in all aspects of the security field. I don't want to just say museums because that's just a small aspect of the whole picture. But threats are always evolving, and you need to, as a security professional, stay on top of it.
I think that that makes a lot of sense. And then, speaking of threats, another reader asked about insider threat in cultural institutions. Someone asked, how do you deal with insider threats in museum environments?
So, regarding that, we've trained our staff on behavioral analysis. So, if they pick up on something that seems suspicious, they're going to report it up the chain of command, and then we'll definitely do an investigation. And it doesn't have to be just physical threats when it comes to it. It could also be theft of intellectual property. So having the clean desk policy, is a recommendation that we provide all departments. Just make sure anything that's sensitive is kept locked away. And that's as much as you can do. The IT department, they have their own process to make sure nobody's taking large amounts of data, taking it where it shouldn't be. But just that awareness, constantly putting out that awareness that you should be monitoring those gaps, I want to say, in your processes and just tightening it up.
Yeah, and that security awareness and security culture in general, I'm sure, informs it as well. The behavioral analysis aspect of that, could you go into that a bit more? What types of behaviors should be looked out for?
Well, we also use it's called the Pathway to Violence infographic from DHS. So you may have an individual that you see day in, day out, and they may seem normal for a while, and then there's a stressor in their life that happens, and they have a complaint, a constant complaint, a grievance, and it may escalate to them pre-planning an attack. So at that point, you as the first line of defense on the floor, if you see issues, you see them asking certain questions about security, the operations at that level, when they don't need to, run it up the chain of command, say, hey, this person's asking some sensitive questions. They're making verbal threats. I overheard it. And that way we can just run it to human resources, do an investigation, and see what's going on. Maybe somebody just needs a little help. Maybe we can head off the threat, I want to say, just
Mm-hmm.
making sure it doesn't go any further than it may. Because a lot of these workplace violence incidents, we hear it in the reports. This person was making threats, they were acting strange. Well, if you saw it, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you say something? And we don't want to take it for granted. We learn from those tragic events.
Definitely, and catching it before it escalates. Another question that we had was, what advice do you have for security leaders in managing the balance between security measures and visitor experience?
I would definitely say work with your partners. So here at the museum, we have the visitor experience staff, and we want to align with them. Those are our stakeholders. So we have our processes here to mitigate threats, and they have their processes on welcoming guests and making sure that they come in as fast as possible and have enough time to actually enjoy the collection. So we have to both meet at the same point and discussing what works for both without compromising. That's my big takeaway. Listen to the feedback from your frontline staff. If people see things that can change how visitors are interacting when they enter the doors or actually in the galleries, take some time, actively listen, and then see what you can implement.
Speaking of that frontline staff feedback aspect, do you advise on how to solicit feedback from frontline staff? Do you do that on an ongoing basis?
It's an ongoing basis. So like if your main function is as an operations manager, take some time at the start of your day, listen to what's going on. At the end of the day is even better because you're closing down your museum. I know I used to run the evening shift, and that's when I would get the complaints. And somebody may not have had a good time or their experience because, we're clearing out and they just didn't like the level of engagement. So I get to hear it from both ends and see, okay, how do we course correct? How can we mitigate this and make sure everybody has a good time as well as the staff feel supported.
I think that that's really good advice. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we had for questions for today, but thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thanks for listening to Ask Me Anything from Security Magazine. Remember to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter to submit your questions for a future AMA episode. Listen to or watch more of the Ask Me Anything series on LinkedIn Live, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or directly from our site, securitymagazine.com. Thanks for tuning in.